The entitled bride humiliated me at her wedding until I revealed I own the venue. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The bride, hyperventilating in her $10,000 gown, stared in absolute horror as I handed her the eviction notice. Her pristine makeup was smudged with angry tears, and the grand ballroom of the historic estate was dead silent. To understand how a lavish, fairy tale wedding imploded so spectacularly, you have to understand the secret I had been keeping. My name is Clara. For years, I was the quiet girl in the background, the one who wore thrift store clothes while girls like Tiffany flaunted designer labels. Tiffany always made sure I knew my place at the bottom of the social hierarchy. But what Tiffany didn't know, what no one from my past knew, was that I had spent my 20s building a highly successful portfolio of investments. One of those investments was the very ground she was standing on. I am the sole owner of the breathtaking botanical estate and vineyard where she decided to host her dream wedding. I operated my businesses behind a strict corporate LLC to maintain my privacy, keep my personal life completely separate, and protect my peace from people exactly like her. I never intended to mix my painful past with my incredibly successful present. But then, the shiny pity invitation arrived in the mail. It was a glossy, oversized envelope with my name scribbled on it, inviting me to the so-called social event of the season. At first, I thought about just tossing it directly in the trash. Why on earth would my high school bully invite me to her wedding? But curiosity ultimately got the better of me. I wanted to see how the other half lived, especially since they were unknowingly paying me an exorbitant premium fee to live it. I didn't know that my quiet weekend of observation was going to turn into a desperate, high-stakes battle to protect my historic property. Tiffany wasn't just throwing a lavish party. She was actively orchestrating a massive, calculated scam designed to defraud my business. What would you do if your biggest bully was unknowingly standing in your house, tearing it apart? Most people would have probably just let it go, hiding in the shadows to avoid the inevitable drama. I decided it was finally time to step fully out of the shadows. I watched her completely unravel as I prepared to drop the ultimate truth bomb. Looking back at my history with Tiffany, her extreme entitlement was always her defining trait. We grew up in the same affluent suburb, but my family was the glaring exception to the neighborhood's wealth. My parents worked incredibly hard just to keep a roof over our heads. Tiffany, on the other hand, was the daughter of a prominent local developer. She drove a brand new luxury car to high school and never let anyone forget it. Her favorite pastime was casually degrading people she deemed beneath her, and I was her absolute favorite target. "Clara, is that sweater from a garage sale?" she would ask loudly in the cafeteria, ensuring everyone heard. "I could donate some of my old clothes to you if things are really that bad at home." It wasn't just the words, it was the sickeningly sweet, condescending tone she used to deliver them. Her constant mockery of my modest background fueled my relentless drive to succeed. The moment I graduated, I distanced myself completely from her toxic orbit. I worked multiple jobs, invested every single penny I earned into real estate, and quietly built my own wealth without ever posting about it on social media. I didn't need external validation, I needed financial security. Over the years, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Tiffany had remained exactly the same: narcissistic, obsessed with social status, and constantly demeaning others to elevate herself. So, when her extravagant wedding invitation showed up at my modest apartment a decade later, it felt like a bizarre glitch in the universe. Why invite the girl you used to relentlessly bully? The answer came in the form of a condescending note she had slipped inside the envelope. "Clara, we have a few empty seats at the back, and I thought it would be nice for you to finally experience a truly luxurious event. Don't worry about a gift." It was a classic Tiffany move, a pity invite designed to remind me of my supposed place in the world. She wanted an audience for her grand, expensive spectacle. I decided to give her exactly what she wanted, but on my terms. I RSVP'd yes, completely unaware of the absolute nightmare she was bringing to my estate. The property Tiffany had booked for her lavish wedding was my absolute pride and joy. It is a stunning, 200-year-old botanical estate and vineyard nestled in the rolling hills just outside the city. Acquiring it had been the crowning achievement of my career so far. The previous owners were facing bankruptcy, and I swooped in with a massive cash offer, shielding my identity entirely behind an ironclad corporate LLC. I did this purposefully. The luxury wedding industry is incredibly cutthroat, and I wanted the focus to be on the breathtaking venue itself, not on the 29-year-old woman who owned it. I poured my heart, soul, and a significant amount of capital into restoring the historic property to its former glory. I meticulously preserved the antique hardwood floors, cultivated the sprawling rose gardens, and hired the absolute best staff in the state. At the center of it all was Marcus, my fiercely loyal and incredibly professional venue manager. Marcus is in his 40s, a seasoned hospitality veteran who handles the day-to-day operations with military precision. He is the only person on the entire estate who knows that I am the actual owner. To the rest of the staff, and certainly to the clients, I am just a silent investor who occasionally drops by to observe the operations. The estate has incredibly strict preservation rules because of its historical significance. We don't allow outside alcohol. We prohibit anything that could damage the antique architecture, and our contracts are airtight regarding liability. When I saw Tiffany's name on the booking ledger months prior, I almost told Marcus to cancel the reservation. But she was paying our premium peak season rate, and I trusted Marcus to keep her in check. I assumed her vanity would prevent her from doing anything too crazy in front of her wealthy guests. I severely underestimated the depths of her entitlement. As the weekend of the wedding rapidly approached, I packed a simple overnight bag and headed to the vineyard. I honestly thought it would be a quiet, mildly amusing weekend watching my old bully show off. I had no idea my patience was about to be pushed past its absolute breaking point. I arrived at the estate on a beautiful, sun-drenched Friday afternoon. The sprawling grounds looked absolutely immaculate, a true testament to Marcus and his dedicated groundskeeping crew. I parked my modest sedan near the back service entrance and made my way toward the grand ballroom to check in. I was wearing a simple, tailored navy dress, elegant, but deliberately understated. I hadn't even made it to the main lobby before I heard her incredibly shrill voice echoing down the corridor. Finally, someone useful. Tiffany marched toward me, practically vibrating with frantic, bridezilla energy. She didn't even say hello. Without missing a single beat, she shoved a heavy cardboard box full of tangled floral arrangements directly into my arms. "Clara, take these to the bridal suite right now. The actual venue staff are being completely useless, so you'll have to help out." She looked me up and down, a familiar, condescending smirk twisting her perfectly manicured face. "I mean, look at what you're wearing. You practically look like one of the caterers anyway, so no one will even notice." Several of her wealthy bridesmaids, hovering nearby in matching silk robes, giggled behind their hands. The sheer audacity of her disrespect was breathtaking. She hadn't invited me to be a guest. She had invited me to be an unpaid, humiliated servant. What would you do if a bully treated you like the help in your own multi-million-dollar establishment? My immediate instinct was to drop the heavy box right on her expensive designer shoes and kick her off the property instantly. But I am a businesswoman first and foremost. I took a deep, calming breath and simply smiled at her. I wanted to see exactly how far she was willing to push the boundaries before I dropped the hammer. "Of course, Tiffany," I replied evenly, adjusting my grip on the heavy box. "I'll take these right up to the suite for you." I turned and walked away, feeling her smug gaze burning into my back. I was playing the long game, carefully gathering my ammunition. My silent compliance was just the calm before the devastating storm. After dropping the heavy boxes in the chaotic bridal suite, I quietly slipped away to observe the rest of the wedding preparations. It didn't take long for Tiffany's true, toxic nature to completely infect the venue. I was standing near the grand ballroom doors when I witnessed her completely lose her mind on one of my youngest servers. The girl, who couldn't have been older than 19, was carefully arranging champagne flutes on a silver tray. Tiffany stormed over, her face flushed with irrational rage. "Are you actually blind?" Tiffany shrieked, causing several guests to turn and stare in shock. "I said the crystal flutes go on the gold trays. This looks absolutely pathetic. Do your job right, or I will personally make sure you never work in this entire city again." The poor server looked completely terrified, frantically trying to rearrange the glasses while holding back tears. I felt a surge of intense, protective anger flare up in my chest. "You can insult my clothes all you want, but you absolutely do not abuse my dedicated staff." I quickly pulled my phone out and sent a highly encrypted text message directly to Marcus. Meet me in the security office right now. I slipped through a discreet side door and navigated the hidden maintenance hallways until I reached the heavily fortified security room. Marcus was already there, pacing the floor with a deeply troubled expression on his face. Clara, we have a massive problem with this bridal party, Marcus said, running a hand over his face. They are treating the staff like absolute garbage, but that's not even the worst of it. They are already blatantly violating the fundamental preservation rules. He pointed a finger at the bank of security monitors on the wall. They've been trying to bypass the service elevators and prop open the climate-controlled doors. They are treating this historic estate like a cheap frat house. I stared at the high-definition monitors, my blood slowly beginning to boil. I told Marcus to strictly document every single infraction without confronting them just yet. I needed to let her build her own inescapable trap. The rehearsal dinner that evening was a masterclass in extreme social exclusion. Tiffany had rented out the estate's stunning glass conservatory for the event, a space that normally felt magical and inviting. However, she managed to turn it into a toxic high school cafeteria. When I approached the beautifully decorated seating chart, I quickly realized exactly what she thought of me. My name wasn't anywhere near the main tables where her wealthy friends and prominent family members were seated. Instead, I found my place card assigned to a tiny, wobbly table shoved in the absolute darkest corner of the room, positioned directly next to the swinging kitchen doors. It was the undeniable reject table, occupied by a few awkward distant cousins and a +1 who didn't speak any English. Tiffany purposefully sauntered over to me as I took my seat, a glass of expensive champagne in her hand. "I hope you don't mind the seating arrangement, Clara," she said, offering a fake, sympathetic pout. "The photographer is capturing candid moments near the front, and I really need the aesthetic of those photos to be completely flawless. You understand, right?" She was explicitly telling me that I was far too poor and ugly to ruin her perfect visual narrative. It was incredibly vile behavior. I simply nodded, offering her a blank, polite smile. "It's perfectly fine, Tiffany. I actually really enjoy watching the behind-the-scenes action." She rolled her eyes and strutted away, fully convinced she had successfully put me in my pathetic place. But she was entirely wrong. Sitting next to the kitchen doors was the absolute best strategic vantage point in the entire venue. I had a clear, unobstructed view of the service hallway, the bar staging area, and every single person who walked in and out of the main event space. I faded completely into the background, quietly watching the chaos unfold. She gave me the perfect spot to monitor her ongoing treachery. The real breakthrough happened halfway through the rehearsal dinner. I had slipped into the luxurious ladies' lounge to escape the noise when a deeply exhausted bridesmaid stumbled through the door. Her name was Jenna, and she looked like she was completely on the verge of a massive nervous breakdown. She kicked off her expensive heels, collapsed onto a velvet sofa, and let out a long, shuddering sigh. "I can't do this anymore," Jenna muttered, mostly to herself. "She is a complete monster." I washed my hands quietly, offering a sympathetic smile through the ornate mirror. "Bridal party duties getting a little too heavy?" I asked gently. Jenna looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mix of sheer exhaustion and deep guilt. "You have no idea. Tiffany is forcing us to do incredibly shady things to save money. She is completely out of her mind." Jenna desperately needed to vent, and I was the perfect, anonymous sounding board. She confessed that Tiffany was furious about the venue's strict premium open bar fees. Instead of paying the contracted amount, Tiffany had forced the groomsmen to purchase dozens of incredibly cheap, unauthorized kegs of low-grade beer and discount liquor from a bulk warehouse store. "They are hiding the cheap stuff in the back of Derek's rental truck," Jenna whispered, looking terrified that someone might overhear us. "Tomorrow, right before the main reception starts, they are planning to secretly swap the venue's premium alcohol with the cheap garbage they bought. They think the venue staff are too stupid to notice the difference during the massive rush." I kept my face perfectly neutral, masking the intense surge of righteous fury building inside me. Bringing unauthorized outside alcohol onto the estate wasn't just a minor breach of contract. It was a massive liability issue that could threaten our entire state liquor license. I thanked Jenna for her honesty and quickly left the bathroom. I had to alert Marcus immediately about the dangerous smuggling operation. I sprinted down the hidden service corridor and practically kicked the door to the security office open. Marcus was sitting at the massive console, a steaming cup of dark coffee in his hand. "Marcus, pull up the exterior cameras facing the south loading dock," I demanded, leaning over his shoulder. "They are trying to smuggle in cheap booze to swap out our premium bar." Marcus's eyes went wide. He rapidly typed on his keyboard, pulling up the high-definition feeds from the exterior perimeter. Sure enough, there was the groom, Derek, standing by a massive rental truck with 3 of his rowdy groomsmen. We watched in absolute horror as the men began unloading heavy metal kegs and massive boxes of discount liquor. But the smuggling operation wasn't even the worst part of the video feed. In their drunken, reckless haste, the groomsmen weren't using the rubber-wheeled service dollies we strictly require for heavy equipment. Instead, they were physically dragging the sharp metal rims of the heavy kegs directly across the 200-year-old, hand-restored hardwood floors of our historic hallway. "Look at the floor," Marcus gasped, pointing at the screen. The high-definition cameras clearly captured the deep, jagged scratches being violently carved into the irreplaceable antique wood. Every single scrape was thousands of dollars in permanent damage. My heart sank, completely shattered by their blatant disrespect for my beautiful property. "Get the high-resolution stills of this exact footage," I ordered, my voice dangerously cold and steady. "I want clear shots of Derek's face, the unauthorized kegs, and the exact moment they destroy the flooring." Marcus quickly isolated the video clips and began printing out the undeniable photographic evidence. We had them dead to rights on a massive, undeniable breach of the liability contract. But as Marcus continued to review the recent security logs, he found something even more disturbing. We were about to uncover the darkest part of Tiffany's master plan. While Marcus was printing the security stills of the horrific property damage, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an email notification. Jenna, the exhausted bridesmaid from the bathroom, had actually followed through on her silent rebellion. She had forwarded me a deeply disturbing email thread between Tiffany and Derek, completely exposing their ultimate financial scam. I read the emails aloud to Marcus, my voice trembling with absolute disbelief. "Listen to this," I said, holding my screen up. "Derek, make sure you complain loudly about the appetizers being cold right after the ceremony," Tiffany wrote. "If we can document that the catering was completely ruined and the service was totally unacceptable, we can threaten to blast them on social media. They will panic and refund the final 50% payment just to keep us quiet." Marcus just stared at me, his face turning an angry shade of crimson. They weren't just smuggling in cheap alcohol and destroying our historic property. They were actively plotting to extort the venue out of tens of thousands of dollars. Tiffany's grand, luxurious wedding was entirely funded by a calculated, malicious fraud scheme. She wanted the absolute best of everything, but fully intended to manipulate my staff to avoid paying the final bill. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was utterly breathtaking. She thought she could completely trample over small businesses because her daddy had a lot of money and she had a few thousand followers online. She viewed my amazing staff as nothing more than disposable pawns in her sick game of financial manipulation. "Print this email thread right now," I told Marcus, forwarding the devastating evidence directly to his secure terminal. "Add it to the file with the security stills and the property damage reports." We had uncovered the entire scope of her disgusting operation. The only question left was exactly how to deliver the fatal blow. The security office felt incredibly tense as Marcus and I meticulously compiled the massive dossier of evidence. We printed out the original, legally binding venue contract that Tiffany had personally signed, aggressively highlighting the strict clauses regarding outside alcohol, historic property damage, and severe financial penalties for breach of agreement. Next, we attached the high-resolution security stills showing Derek and the groomsmen violently gouging the antique hardwood floors with their illegal kegs. Finally, we placed a printed copy of the extortion email thread right on top of the stack. Marcus rapidly calculated the exact financial damages. Between the ruined 200-year-old flooring, the unauthorized alcohol penalties, and the immediate breach of contract fees, the itemized bill came to an astonishing $30,000. We have enough evidence here to immediately shut down the entire event and kick them off the property right now, Marcus stated, tapping the thick manila folder. "I can call local law enforcement to assist with the eviction." I stared at the horrifying evidence, facing a massive moral dilemma. We were just hours away from the actual wedding ceremony. If I pulled the plug right now, I would completely ruin the wedding before she even walked down the aisle. It felt incredibly ruthless, even for a woman who had bullied me for years. But if I let the ceremony proceed, I was allowing her to continue her malicious scam against my incredibly hardworking staff. I thought about the terrified young server Tiffany had screamed at, and the deep, jagged scratches permanently scarring my beautiful estate. Tiffany didn't deserve an ounce of my sympathy. We let them have the ceremony, I decided, my voice devoid of any emotion. We let them get legally married. But the absolute second she tries to execute her catering scam at the reception, we drop the hammer. I was going to let her dig her own public grave. Armed with the devastating folder of evidence, I quietly slipped out of the security office and walked down the long, heavily carpeted corridor toward the main ballroom. I was completely focused on the impending confrontation when I suddenly collided with a massive wall of white silk and expensive lace. It was Tiffany, fully dressed in her extravagant wedding gown, flanked by her equally terrifying mother. "Watch exactly where you are going, Clara," Tiffany snapped loudly, her eyes narrowing sharply as she noticed the restricted area I had just exited. "What are you even doing creeping around down here? This hallway is for venue management only. Are you snooping around trying to steal something?" Her mother scoffed loudly, looking down her nose at my modest navy dress. "I told you it was a terrible idea to invite the charity case, Tiffany. She clearly doesn't know how to behave in a high-class establishment." Tiffany stepped closer, jabbing a sharp, manicured finger directly into my shoulder. "Listen to me, you broke loser. You are incredibly lucky I even allowed you to step foot on this gorgeous property. You will never, ever be able to afford a place like this in your miserable life. Go sit at your pathetic little table in the corner and stay completely out of my sight until the wedding is entirely over." The absolute vitriol in her voice was staggering. For a brief, explosive second, my hand tightened violently around the thick manila folder hidden behind my back. I desperately wanted to shove the LLC ownership papers directly into her smug face right then and there. I wanted to watch her arrogant smirk completely shatter into a million tiny pieces. But I forced myself to swallow the burning rage. A private confrontation in a dark hallway wasn't going to teach her the lesson she so desperately needed to learn. I lowered my head and offered a meek apology. The lavish wedding ceremony went off without a single hitch, but the real theater began the moment the grand reception doors finally opened. Hundreds of wealthy guests poured into the breathtaking ballroom, taking their seats under the massive, sparkling crystal chandeliers. I quietly took my assigned spot at the designated reject table near the kitchen doors, keeping my eyes locked dead on the raised head table where the bridal party sat. Just as Jenna's forwarded email had predicted, Tiffany didn't wait long to execute her malicious extortion scheme. During the main dinner service, while the room was relatively quiet and guests were eating, Tiffany suddenly stood up and aggressively clinked her expensive champagne glass with a silver spoon. The entire room went completely silent, expecting a heartfelt toast from the radiant bride. Instead, Tiffany grabbed a microphone and pointed directly at Marcus, who was standing professionally near the catering station. "Excuse me, venue manager." Tiffany's amplified voice echoed harshly throughout the massive ballroom. "I need you up here right this second." Marcus calmly walked up to the head table, his face a perfectly blank mask of professional courtesy. "This service is absolutely unacceptable," Tiffany shrieked into the microphone, ensuring every single guest heard her outrageous claims. "The appetizers were completely freezing cold, the staff is incredibly rude, and this whole event is totally ruined. I demand a full, 100% refund immediately, or I am taking this disaster to the press." She was trying to publicly humiliate my manager to force a massive financial concession. Derek, the groom, nodded aggressively in agreement, playing his part in the fraudulent scam perfectly. The wealthy guests gasped loudly, murmuring nervously among themselves as they watched the horrifying spectacle unfold. It was finally time for the real owner to step in. Marcus didn't flinch or apologize to the screaming bride. He simply took a deliberate step back and looked directly toward the swinging kitchen doors. I stood up from my wobbly reject table, slowly smoothing down my modest navy dress, and confidently walked across the massive ballroom. The room was absolutely dead silent as I approached the elevated head table. Tiffany glared at me, her face twisting in absolute confusion and deep, irrational rage. "Clara, what on earth are you doing?" she hissed aggressively, attempting to cover the microphone. "Get back to your pathetic corner right now." I didn't say a single word in response. I simply reached out and took the live microphone directly from her trembling hand. "Actually, Tiffany, Marcus doesn't have the authority to issue massive refunds," I said clearly, my voice echoing powerfully off the high ceilings. "That requires the explicit signature of the primary estate owner." I opened the thick manila folder and slammed the corporate LLC ownership documents directly onto the table in front of her. Tiffany stared at my legal signature on the proprietary deeds, all the color instantly draining from her perfectly contoured face. You own this place?" she stammered, her voice barely a terrified whisper. "I do," I replied loudly into the live microphone. "And I am officially denying your fraudulent refund request. In fact, I am presenting you with this itemized invoice for $30,000. I pulled out the high-resolution security stills and held them up for the entire room to clearly see. "This bill covers the incredibly cheap, unauthorized alcohol your groomsmen illegally smuggled onto my property to swap with our premium bar. It also covers the massive, permanent damages your husband caused when he violently dragged those illegal kegs across my 200-year-old antique hardwood floors." I then pulled out the printed email thread. "And this is the written proof of your premeditated scam to extort my hard-working staff." The entire grand ballroom immediately erupted into absolute, undeniable shock. The immediate fallout was nothing short of spectacularly chaotic. Derek, the groom, rapidly snatched the itemized $30,000 invoice from the table, his face turning an incredibly sickly shade of white. He clearly had absolutely no idea about the massive financial ruin his new wife had just orchestrated on their actual wedding night. Tiffany's wealthy parents, fully realizing the profound social humiliation unfolding before their very eyes, immediately rushed the stage, frantically trying to grab the live microphone from my hand. But the devastating damage was already permanently done. Tiffany, completely unable to process the total destruction of her carefully crafted public image, threw a massive, hysterical tantrum right there on the decorated head table. She collapsed into her chair, hyperventilating in her $10,000 designer gown, screaming that I had maliciously ruined her special day out of pure, bitter jealousy. The wealthy wedding guests, utterly disgusted by the undeniable proof of her extortion and cheap smuggling scam, didn't offer her a single ounce of sympathy. Instead, a massive wave of awkward, heavy silence washed over the crowd as people began quietly gathering their expensive coats and heading directly for the main exits. Even Jenna, the exhausted bridesmaid, completely abandoned her post, dropping her wilted floral bouquet on the floor and walking out the front doors without looking back. I stood incredibly tall, looking down at the spoiled girl who had spent her entire life trying to make me feel extremely small and insignificant. "Your event is officially terminated due to a massive, documented breach of contract," I stated coldly, ensuring my voice carried over her pathetic sobbing. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack up your cheap alcohol, collect your ruined belongings, and completely vacate my historic property." Marcus stepped forward, flanked by 3 large security guards ready to enforce my strict eviction notice. Her fairy tale wedding had officially ended in absolute disgrace. Exactly an hour later, the massive grand ballroom was completely empty, save for my incredible staff working diligently to clean up the chaotic mess the disgraced bridal party had left behind. I stood quietly on the beautiful outdoor terrace, watching the taillights of Tiffany's luxury getaway car speed furiously down the long, sweeping gravel driveway. She had left the venue in total social disgrace, facing a massive legal battle and a $30,000 penalty bill that my ruthless corporate lawyers would absolutely, unequivocally enforce. The entire experience was profoundly exhausting, but it ultimately brought me an incredible sense of deep, undeniable closure. I finally realized that true class has absolutely nothing to do with how much money your wealthy parents have in the bank, or how incredibly expensive your designer wedding gown happens to be. True class is entirely defined by how you choose to treat the hardworking people around you, especially those you mistakenly believe are somehow beneath you. Tiffany's extreme entitlement and arrogance was nothing more than a fragile, hollow shell explicitly designed to mask her own deep, pathetic insecurities. She spent her entire life trying to violently tear others down because she possessed absolutely no genuine moral value of her own. My incredible financial success wasn't just about the millions of dollars or owning a stunning historic property. It was about meticulously building an impenetrable life where toxic people like her could never dictate my personal worth ever again. If you take one practical lesson from my chaotic story, let it be this incredibly important piece of advice. Never let anyone make you feel incredibly small just because your beginnings were profoundly modest. Work fiercely in total silence. Build your own secure empire, and always meticulously document every single breach of contract. Bullies only hold power when you actively allow them to control your personal narrative. Know your true worth, and never be afraid to hand them the bill.